Hey everyone. So we're finishing this wonderful novel this week, and I just wanted to make a quick video to go over a few things that I want you to keep thinking about as you're reading. So, real quick, I just want to say how pleased I was with the quality of the discussions this last week. I really liked the way that you were diving into some of the details of what was happening in Cora's journey and interpreting them, bringing your own insights into what you read. So, really good posts. I also appreciated reading the replies that you made to my post. You earned some bonus points there, some of you. I'll be replying to those as well very soon. But really nice work. Keep that up. Um, Again, there's a strong correlation between reading as many posts as you can and then doing well on the quiz. I'm looking at D2L statistics, and I see that when students are reading 35 or 40 of the posts, they tend to do really well on the quizzes. And students who've read 0 posts, 1 or 2, or maybe fewer than 10, they don't tend to do as well usually. So remember that that's kind of by design. In my replies to each of you, I tend to talk about things that are important in the novel. And if I think they're important, they're probably going to be on the quiz as well, too. So that's not really a coincidence. So, and you also notice how your classmates are noticing things that you might have noticed. That's just kind of the way it works. When we talk about literature, we're going to learn from each other. So keep reading those posts. All right, so here are some things I want you to pay attention to in the second half. First of all, Valentine Farm. I want you to think about the sense of community that Cora finds there. Especially if you compare it to Randall, you can see that there are some striking differences. I don't want to give any spoilers here, but think about that. Think about the threats to the community. Think about the visions for the future. The leaders of Valentine Farm have some very different goals for the future, and there are some tensions in those competing goals. Later this semester, we're going to take a look at W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, who each at the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s had extremely different visions for what was called racial uplift and how to go about that. And I think we see those philosophies mirrored in the leadership and the tensions in Valentine. And then, of course, I want you to keep thinking about Cora, our beloved protagonist. I know many of us have grown very fond of Cora for a variety of reasons. We see a lot to admire in her. But remember that she sees herself as a stray, going back to Randall Plantation, where she was first considered a stray. In this last section that we read, we have this really powerful quotation that I wanted to look at with you. This is when she is waiting for the train in the Underground Railroad station in South Carolina when she's trying to leave South Carolina. And she doesn't know where Caesar is. She's devastated by all that she's learned about the horrors of South Carolina. She was a stray after all. A stray not only in its plantation meaning, orphaned with no one to look after her, but in every other sphere as well. Somewhere years ago, she had stepped off the path of life and could no longer find her way back to the family of people. I think that's just such a powerful metaphor, stepped off the path of life. I want you to think about whether you see her that way. As somebody who can't find her way back to the family of people. Is that what you're thinking of her in Valentine? Is that what you're thinking about her at the end of the novel? Keep that quotation in mind, and also take a look at the reading guide, question 2, in addition to other questions about Cora throughout the reading guide. She's just a teenager when all of this is happening, so I want you to think about whether this is kind of a coming of age story. Is this about her initiation into adulthood? Traumatic initiation. I want you to think about the structure of the novel. Now, you might remember in the first video I made on the Underground Railroad, I talked about how a lot of contemporary writing of the last few decades experiments with structure. Instead of telling stories in a chronological order, they will experiment with that timeline and go in a linear fashion. So we're going to learn something near the very end of the novel that we could have learned much earlier if Whitehead had decided to tell a chronological story. I want you to think about, I'm being vague because I don't want to give any spoilers, but I want you to think about how the placement of that development affects the way that we read the story and affects Cora. I want you to think about the whole Underground Railroad, this mysterious railroad. We never really learn how it was built, right? Lumley doesn't really tell Cora, when Cora asks how it was built when they're in the first station in Georgia, he says, "Who builds anything in this country?" So we know that it's built by black labor. We know there are references to all of the contributions of the labor done by enslaved and free black people. And all the mystery of the Underground Railroad is just one of those things. Which brings me to magical realism. Remember from the first video that magical realism is when something magical or fantastical happens in an otherwise realistic plot or realistic setting. Elements of fantasy, elements of magic, instead of the whole thing being fantasy. Do you see the Underground Railroad as an element of fantasy? What else do you see that might be considered magical realism in this novel? I also want you to think about the ending, of course. And again, I'm going to be vague here, but I'm going to want to know about whether you think it's a hopeful ending or not. And in order to answer that question, of course, you have to read the last chapter, but I also want you to look at the very last runaway ad. Remember, as I said in the first video, Whitehead is using these runaway slave ads as a way to help advance his story and bring some realism into his story, right? Most of these ads are real. They were written by people who were searching, by enslaved people who had run away, except for the last one. What details can we glean from that ad that might help us interpret the ending? Obviously, there are more ideas in the reading guide, so read those. All right, so we're going to have the usual deadlines this week. For discussion posts, I know the first couple of weeks I had you post at noon, but I think 11:59 p.m. is working pretty well for you all. So let's keep it 11:59 p.m. for all your deadlines. Remember, when you post, if you're going to earn all 15 points for that first post, I'm going to want to see that you have shown enough comprehension of the book, you understand the plot, and not just the first couple pages of the reading selection, but further into it. I also want to see that you write at least 150 words, okay? And then reply to 2 of your classmates. When you are reading the discussion posts, remember, I want you to read each other's posts, but also the way that I reply to each post, as I mentioned earlier in this video, because I tend to give you some important information. And I also want you to be part of that discussion where we're all learning from each other. The quiz will be very similar to the ones you've gotten used to, except there will be a couple of more open-ended questions where you're asked to write a few sentences. So if you are paying attention to the things that this video asks you to, and if you're paying attention to the reading guide and the discussions, you should do well in the quiz. Again, the statistics are showing that correlation there. Okay. I want to mention that next week we start Toni Morrison's amazing novel, Song of Solomon. I really can't wait. If you don't have your copy yet, make sure you buy one, or you can get an ebook from our library. There are some local libraries that may have a copy too, but make sure you're going to want to have that next week. Let me know if you have any questions about that, okay? I really hope that you enjoy the last part of Cora's journey, and I will see you in discussions this week. Let me know if you need anything. You know how to find me, right? Contact me by email, come see me during my office hours, or make an appointment for virtual office hours, or if you're on campus, just stop by anytime you see the door open, okay? Take care. Have a good week.